She set her last coin on the counter, pushed it toward the innkeeper without a word, and walked back out into the heat, because pride was the only thing Silver Creek hadn't taken from her yet. Abigail Carter had arrived on that train with a name, a promise, and a future. 3 days later, she had none of those things. She wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of people who'd already decided what she was worth. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow along until the very last word, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train had pulled out of Silver Creek before the dust even settled. Abigail Carter stood on the platform with a leather valise at her feet, a folded letter in her hand, and 73 cents in her coat pocket. The summer heat pressed down on her like something alive. The Montana sky above her was enormous and indifferent, the kind of sky that made a person feel very small and very alone at the same time. She read the letter again. Not because she didn't know what it said. She knew every word. She'd read it so many times on the train from Missouri that the paper had softened at the folds. She read it because she needed to believe it still meant something. Come west, Miss Carter. Employment secured. Respectable arrangement. A future worth having. It was signed by a man named Gerald Holt. A businessman, he'd called himself. A man of means and good standing in Silver Creek, Montana. He'd written to the Women's Placement Agency in St. Louis, and the agency had written to Abigail, and Abigail, 26 years old, recently dismissed from her teaching position with no family left and no prospects in sight, had said yes. She had packed everything she owned into that valise. She had sold her mother's brooch to cover the train fare. She had told herself it was a beginning, not a surrender. Gerald Holt was not on the platform. He was not in the station house either. She'd asked the station master, a thin man with spectacles and the personality of a fence post. Holt, he'd repeated, barely looking up from his ledger. Left town 2 weeks ago. Went to Denver, I heard. Something about a business deal gone wrong. Abigail had stood very still. He wrote to me. He sent for me. Lots of men send for women they never intend to receive, miss. This is the frontier. Things change fast. He'd gone back to his ledger. You'll want to speak to someone at the boarding house if you need a room, assuming you can pay. That had been 3 days ago. She could not pay. Not anymore. The boarding house woman, Mrs. Claremont, wide as a doorway and cold as creek water, had given her 3 nights on the promise of wages not yet earned. Abigail had spent those 3 days knocking on every door on Main Street asking for work. A seamstress who needed no help. A laundress who already had 3 girls. A general store owner who looked her up and down and offered something that wasn't work at all, and she'd walked out before he finished his sentence. This morning, Mrs. Claremont had put her valise on the porch. I run a respectable house, the woman had said, arms folded, not unkind exactly, but not kind either. I can't carry charity cases. You've got till noon to make arrangements. Noon had come and gone. Abigail had spent the last of her coins on a piece of bread from the bakery. She'd eaten it slowly, standing in the alley beside the building out of sight, because she still had enough pride left not to eat her last meal in public. And then she'd walked back to the inn, picked up her valise, and kept walking. She didn't know where she was going. The street smelled of horse and sawdust, and something frying somewhere that made her stomach clench. Men passed without looking at her. Women passed and looked too long. The way people look at something that makes them uncomfortable, a reminder of how fast a life can go wrong. She stopped in front of a building with a painted sign above the door. May's Kitchen. Hot meals, reasonable prices. Through the window she could see a counter, a few tables, a woman moving fast behind the bar. The place was modest, nothing fancy. But the door was open and something smelled like coffee. Abigail squared her shoulders, picked up her valise, and walked inside. The woman behind the counter was May Tillman, and she was the kind of person who didn't waste words. She was somewhere between 50 and ancient, with arms that had carried heavy things for a long time, and eyes that had seen most of what life had to offer. She looked at Abigail the way a person looks at a situation, not a problem. "You're the Holt woman," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Abigail Carter," Abigail said. "I'm looking for work. I know who you are. Town this size, everybody knows everybody's business before they know their own. May set a coffee cup on the counter and filled it without being asked. Sit down before you fall down. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday. I'm fine. That wasn't a question either. Sit. Abigail sat. She wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat work into her fingers, even though it was the middle of summer and she wasn't cold. Sometimes warmth was just warmth, and a person needed it for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. I can cook, Abigail said. Clean. Wait tables. Whatever you need. I'm not particular about hours. May studied her. You got references. I was a school teacher in Missouri for 3 years. Before that, I kept house for my father until he passed. She paused. I don't have letters with me. I can write to the school board if you need. I don't need letters, May said. I need someone who'll show up every morning before 5 and still be standing at 7 in the evening. I need someone who won't quit when the drovers come through rowdy, and I need someone who won't steal from me. That's what I need. I won't steal from you. No, May said, studying her again. I don't reckon you will. She pulled her apron strings tighter. Pays $1 a week plus 1 meal a day. I got a room in the back. It's small and it's hot in the summer and cold in the winter, but it's yours if you want it. Abigail felt something loosen in her chest. When do I start? You just did. Drink your coffee, and I'll show you the kitchen. She lasted 6 hours before the day broke open. She'd been clearing plates from the back corner table 3 drovers, mostly polite except for the youngest one who kept calling her darlin', in a way that made her jaw tight when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the window glass. 2 men came in carrying a third between them. The man they carried was tall. Even sagging between the other 2, he was tall with broad shoulders and a frame that had clearly been put through hard use. He was wearing a canvas work shirt, dark with sweat and blood. Both a leather vest pushed open worn boots dragging the floor. His hat had been shoved down crooked on his head, and his face was turned sideways, but Abigail could see the hard line of a jaw and several days of dark beard. We need help, one of the men said. He was older, hat in hand, genuinely frightened. He took a bad fall. Fence post came down on him, and then the horse spooked. Get him to the table, May said, already coming around the counter. They got him down on the long table at the back wall. He groaned when they lowered him, a deep, involuntary sound, and his eyes opened briefly. They were gray, dark gray, like creek water before a storm. They focused on nothing in particular, and then shut again. May leaned over him, pressed 2 fingers to his neck, looked at the wound on his side where the shirt had been torn open and something dark and wet had soaked through. Somebody go get Doc Prentice, she said. Doc Prentice is out at the Larson farm, the older man said. Rode out this morning. Won't be back till nightfall. May made a sound low in her throat. She looked at the wound again. Then she looked up and looked straight at Abigail. You said you kept house, May said. You know anything about tending wounds? Some, Abigail said. My father had a farm. There were accidents. Good enough. Come here. She didn't hesitate. She set the plates down, crossed the room, and looked at what she was dealing with. It was bad, but it wasn't unsurvivable. The gash ran along his left side deep enough to need stitching, not deep enough to have reached anything vital, she thought. There was a bruise spreading across his ribs that suggested at least one of them might be cracked. His breathing was labored but even. I need hot water, clean cloth, and needle and thread, she said. May nodded and went. The 2 men who'd brought him in stood back, hats in hand, uncomfortable, in the way that men sometimes get uncomfortable when practical things need doing. Who is he? Abigail asked, not looking up. Cole Bennett, the older man said. He's got a place up in the mountains. Runs cattle up there on his own. He's alone up there. Far as anyone knows, he don't come to town much, keeps to himself. Abigail pressed a folded cloth against the wound, applying pressure. The man Cole made a sound, and his hand moved, reaching for something by instinct. It's all right, she said, because it was what you said. I'm not going to hurt you. His hand found her wrist. Not grabbing, just landing there. His grip was loose and unfocused, the grip of a man not fully conscious, but his thumb moved slightly as though confirming she was real. Then his hand fell away, and he went still again. Tut-tang. She stitched him herself. May held the lamp. Abigail worked. She'd watched the farm doctor do this twice when she was a girl, and she had steady hands and the ability to make herself not think about what she was doing, which was the most useful skill she'd discovered about herself. He stayed half-conscious through most of it. A few times he came close enough to the surface to make a sound, and once he said something, she couldn't make out a word, or maybe a name, low and rough. He smelled of horses and open air, and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into a body that has been working too hard for too long. When she tied off the last stitch, she sat back and let out a breath she'd been holding for some time. "Good work," May said quietly. She wasn't a woman who handed out compliments carelessly, and Abigail understood that. "He should see a real doctor when Prentice gets back," Abigail said. "He will. In the meantime, he can sleep here. I'll have the men move him to the storeroom where it's cooler." May studied her. "You all right?" "Yes," Abigail said. And she was mostly. Her hands were steady. The unsteadiness was somewhere else, somewhere in her chest, in the region of the question she hadn't let herself ask yet. She'd arrived in Silver Creek with nothing and no one. She'd been discarded by a man she'd never met, dismissed by a town that owed her nothing left standing in the heat with a valise and 73 cents. And then, inside of one afternoon, she had used her hands to keep a stranger alive. She didn't know what to make of that. I was awake by the time supper rush ended. Abigail had been cleaning down the counter when she heard movement from the back. She went to the doorway of the storeroom and found him trying to sit up, one hand braced against the wall, face set with the specific expression of a man who refused to admit something hurt. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. In the dim light of the storeroom, with the lamp from the kitchen falling across the doorway, his face was drawn and pale beneath the weathering, but his eyes were sharp, alert. The kind of eyes that had been taking in information about a room from the moment they opened. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was rough low. Western, a voice that had spent most of its life outdoors. "Abigail Carter. I work here. Don't sit up." "I need to." "Whatever you need to do, you'll do it lying down, or you'll tear the stitches and make things considerably worse. I put those in myself, and I'd rather not repeat the experience." A pause. He looked at her with that steady gray gaze. "You stitched me up. Someone had to. Doctor was out of town." She came into the room and moved the lamp from the floor to the shelf so he could see better. "You've got a gash on your side, and at least one cracked rib. You lost some blood, not enough to be dangerous if you rest. You need water, and you need to stay still." He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but adjusting. Like a man revising his understanding of a situation. "Thank you," he said. Not perfunctory, he meant it. "You're welcome." She handed him the tin cup of water she'd brought. "Cole Bennett, is that right?" He drank before he answered, long and slow like a man who'd been very thirsty for a long time. "That's right. The men who brought you in said you have a place up in the mountains." "I do." "What happened to you?" Another pause. This one had a different quality. Careful. "Fence came down," he said. "Horse spooked." She looked at him steadily. "The cut on your side isn't from a fence post, Mr. Bennett. I've seen fence post injuries. This is a blade wound." He met her gaze, neither confirmed nor denied. "Whatever happened to you," she said, "it's not my business, but it would be useful to know if you're likely to have more trouble heading your way, because that would affect how quickly you need to be moved." Something in him seemed to settle like a decision made. "I had a disagreement with some men who think the land I'm running cattle on belongs to them," he said. "It doesn't." The disagreement got physical. "Are those men likely to come looking for you here?" "No, they made their point. They'll figure I took it." "Did you?" A slow look. And then barely something that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to it. "No, ma'am." "Then you'd best heal up fast." She turned to leave. "Miss Carter?" She stopped. "You said you work here." He said it like a man asking something without asking it directly. "As of this afternoon, yes." "You just arrived in Silver Creek." You heard about that. Heard about a woman from Missouri. Came out to marry Gerald Holt. He said the name without inflection, but something beneath the flatness of it communicated his opinion clearly enough. Holt's gone. Yes, I'm aware. I was quiet for a moment. And then, May Tillman's a good woman. You're safe working for her. It was such a straightforward statement, said without condescension, without any of the theatrical pity she'd been receiving from the town for 3 days. Just a simple practical fact offered by a man who seemed to understand that practical facts were sometimes what a person needed. Thank you, she said. Sleep, Mr. Bennett. She went back to finish closing up the kitchen. May said he could stay 3 days. That became 5 and then a week. The doctor came and confirmed what Abigail had already assessed. Cracked rib, clean wound, good stitching work. He told Cole he was fortunate, and told Abigail she'd done well, and then went on his way. Cole was not a gracious patient. He was not complaining exactly, but he was restless in the way that men who spend their lives moving get restless when they're made to stay still. He tried to help with things. Abigail caught him attempting to move a flour sack on the second day and told him sharply to put it down. He put it down, but he argued about it first. I'm not made of paper, he said. You're made of stitches right now, she said. Act accordingly, he argued. She didn't yield. He respected her for it, she thought, in the grudging way that certain kinds of men respect things that push back. She brought him his meals. In the mornings when the breakfast rush was done, she'd check his bandaging. They talked during those intervals briefly at first, then longer as the days went on. She learned things about him the way you learn things about a person who doesn't volunteer information freely in pieces through the spaces between what they said. He'd grown up on a cattle ranch somewhere up in the mountains, a spread called the High Pine. Though he said the name without warmth. He'd left it some years back. He ran his own small operation now, just him and a handful of head on land he'd bought himself. He was 38 years old, and he had no family nearby, and he didn't appear to have friends in town, only people who knew of him. Why do you live alone up there? She asked on the third morning. She was sitting on the overturned crate she'd taken to using as a chair when she came in to check on him. It suits me, he said. You're the only company you've got. That suits me too. She looked at him. Has it always? He looked back at her, and for a moment she thought he was going to shut down, give her the flat closed-off look he used like a door. But instead, something shifted slightly. No, he said. Not always. She didn't push. Some things a person had to come to in their own time. On the fourth day, the trouble started. It came in the form of 2 men she didn't know who appeared at the kitchen door during the midday lull. They weren't rowdy. They were worse than rowdy. They were deliberate. Deliberate and quiet the way men get when they've come to do something specific and don't want an audience. The taller one looked past Abigail like she wasn't worth looking at. We heard Cole Bennett is here. We'd like a word. Mr. Bennett isn't available, Abigail said. She stood square in the doorway. She was 130 pounds and not particularly tall, but she had discovered over the past few days that she could make herself feel larger than she was when necessary. That's not your call to make, miss. It is, actually. He's recovering from injuries, and he's not receiving visitors. The taller man's eyes finally moved to her. You the woman Holt sent for. She kept her face still. I work here. He seemed to find this amusing in an unpleasant way. Long way to come just to end up waiting tables. A long way to come, she agreed, and here I am, still standing. Now I suggest you leave a message if you have one, or come back when he's well enough to receive company. The second man, shorter with a dark mustache, spoke for the first time. You tell Bennett that Silas Greer's patience isn't infinite. He'll want to think carefully about what comes next. I'll relay the message, Abigail said. She waited until they left. Then she turned and walked straight to the storeroom. Cole was already sitting up, face hard, jaw set. I heard, he said. Silas Greer, she said. He's the man who thinks he owns the land I'm running cattle on. He's got money, and he's got men, and he's been trying to push me off the high pasture for 2 years. Was that his men, the ones who cut you? Cole's jaw tightened. Yes. She sat down on the crate. You're not going to be able to keep running from this. I know that. What are you going to do? He looked at her steadily. Fight. Legally. I've got a deed. I've got records. I've got a survey done 8 years ago by a federal surveyor. Greer thinks money outweighs paper, but paper's paper and the law is the law even out here. Even out here, she repeated. You don't sound convinced. I'm working on being convinced. She was quiet for a moment. Then, when you go back up there, you're going to need help. Someone who can handle records, write letters, keep track of what's been filed with the land office and what hasn't. He watched her. You offering? I'm a school teacher, she said. I can read, write cipher, and organize a filing cabinet faster than most people alive. I came to this town to build something and got handed nothing. So yes, I'm offering. The gray eyes moved over her face. Why? He asked. Not suspicious, genuinely asking. Because Greer's men looked at me like I was furniture, she said. And I am tired of being looked at like that. Something in Cole Bennett's expression shifted. Not the small, not quite smile from before. Something more serious than that. Something that looked like recognition. That's a good reason, he said. I thought so. The week stretched into 2 before the doctor cleared Cole to travel. During that time, something changed between them, not dramatically, not with any declarations. It was quieter than that. More like a shift in weight, the way a door settles into a frame. She made him eat regular meals, and he did, though he complained that she cooked vegetables too long. She told him she'd cook them exactly as long as she pleased. He said she was the most stubborn woman he'd ever encountered. She said that was almost certainly not true. He laughed at that. It wasn't a large laugh. Cole Bennett wasn't a large laugh kind of man, but it was genuine. It changed his whole face for a moment. Made him look younger. Made him look like someone who hadn't always been as guarded as he was now. She noticed that. She noticed it and filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept the things that mattered. In the evenings after May locked up and Abigail had finished her work, she would bring her mending into the storeroom and they would talk while she sewed. He told her more about the mountain land, the way the morning fog sat in the valleys, the specific temperature of the creek water in summer, the sound a pine forest makes when the wind comes through it. He described it the way people describe places they love when they've been away from them too long. You miss it, she said on a night when the heat outside had finally broken slightly and a faint cool air moved through the open window. Every day, he said. There's something up there that I can't explain to anybody who hasn't been there. A kind of... He stopped. Started again. Quiet. The right kind of quiet. Like the world is exactly the size it's supposed to be. She thought about that. I used to feel something like that in my mother's kitchen, she said. When I was small, before she died, everything was exactly the right size. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago. Doesn't always matter how long ago, he said. She looked up from her mending. He was looking at the wall at nothing but something in his face said he knew exactly what he was talking about. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. Jaffa. May called her into the kitchen on the 13th day. Cole's going back up to his mountain in 2 days, May said. She was rolling pie crust with the efficiency of a woman who had made 10,000 pies. He'll need supplies. I'm putting together a box. All right. May kept rolling. He asked if you'd consider going with him. Said he could use someone with bookkeeping sense while he works through the business with the land office. Abigail was very still. He asked you to ask me. He asked me to ask you because he said... May paused, choosing words carefully, that he didn't want to put you in an awkward position, asking himself. He thought it might seem like he was taking advantage of my situation, Abigail said. Something like that. She thought about it. She thought about Silas Greer's men and their quiet deliberateness. She thought about a mountain where the world was the right size. She thought about Gerald Holt, who had made a promise and left, and the 73 cents she'd arrived with, and the way Cole Bennett had looked at her when she said she was tired of being looked at like furniture. Tell him, she said, That I'll come. But I'm going as an employee, not a charity case. Fair wages for fair work. We settle terms before we leave. May's mouth curved, just slightly. That's what I told him you'd say. And? He said that was exactly what he was hoping you'd say. Abigail turned back to her work. But she allowed herself very quietly, where no one could see it, a small moment of something she hadn't felt since the train had pulled out of Silver Creek and left her standing alone on the platform. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But the shape of something that might become it. On the morning of the 15th day, Abigail Carter picked up her valise. She stood in May's kitchen and said goodbye to the woman who had given her coffee and work, and a back room when she had nothing. And May had gripped her hand briefly and said, "You write to me," in the tone of a woman who meant it. Cole was outside with the horses and a packed mule. He looked better than he had. Still careful, still moving with the guarded quality of someone whose ribs hadn't fully forgiven him yet, but upright and present and steady. He helped her up onto the horse without being asked, and without any of the performative chivalry that would have made it awkward. Just matter-of-fact practical the way he did everything. They rode out of Silver Creek as the sun came up over the eastern ridge, turning the whole valley gold. The town fell away behind them. The road ahead narrowed and rose, climbing toward the mountains, toward pine trees, toward a world that Cole had described as the right size. Abigail looked back once. Silver Creek sat in the valley going about its morning business. It did not look like a place that would miss her. She did not expect it to. She turned back to the road ahead. "You have any regrets?" Cole asked. He was riding beside her, hat pulled low against the rising sun. She thought about it honestly. About leaving? No. About coming west in the first place? She considered. Ask me again in 6 months. He nodded slowly, like that was exactly the kind of honest answer he'd hoped for. They rode on into the summer morning, toward the mountains, toward trouble that wasn't finished with either of them, toward a story that was only just beginning. The heat was building already, that relentless Montana summer heat pressing down on the open land. But the road was shaded ahead where the pines began, and up in the distance. Somewhere she couldn't see yet, there was a place where the world was supposed to feel like the right size. She wasn't there yet. But for the first time since she'd stepped off that train with nothing, she believed she was heading in the right direction. The mountain had its own rules. Abigail learned this within the first hour of the ride up. The road, if it could be called that, was narrow and switchbacked and demanding in a way that required a person's complete attention. Cole rode ahead without looking back, which she appreciated. She didn't want to be watched. She wanted to find her footing literally and otherwise without an audience. By the time they reached the flat ground where Cole's cabin sat, the sun had climbed well past midday, and she was sore in places she hadn't expected. She slid down from the horse herself before he could offer help, and she was glad she did, because her legs shook slightly when she landed, and she had about half a second to steady herself before he turned around. "Water first," he said. "Then I'll show you where things are." The cabin was small and sparse. Not dirty. He wasn't a man who lived in filth, but stripped down to the essential. A table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a cot against one wall, and a second sleeping area, partitioned by a hanging canvas curtain. A shelf of books she hadn't expected. A wooden chest. Tools hanging from nails with the precision of someone who wanted to know where everything was at all times. She put her valise down and didn't say anything about the curtain or the sleeping arrangements. She understood that he'd done the best he could with what he had, and she'd been sleeping in a storeroom for 2 weeks. A partitioned space with a curtain was practically a hotel. "The books," she said instead of any of that. "What about them?" "I didn't expect them." He handed her a tin cup of water and refilled his own from the bucket by the door. "Most people don't." She looked at the spines. History. Some law. A worn Bible that looked like it had been opened many times. A collection of Shakespeare that surprised her most of all. "You read Shakespeare up here on your own in the mountains. Is that strange?" "No," she said and meant it. "I just know. It's not strange." He watched her take in the shelf. "My mother left me those. She was a reader." "Was?" Abigail asked. "She died when I was 19. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." She recognized those words. She'd said them herself 2 weeks prior about her own mother. He knew she recognized them. Something passed between them, not spoken, just acknowledged, and they moved on from it, the way two people move on from a thing they both understand. "Show me what needs to be done," she said. What needed to be done was considerable. Cole explained it while they stood at the table, the deed and survey papers spread out between them. The land he'd been running his cattle on, the high pasture, 240 acres of summer grazing above the tree line, had been his by legal purchase for 6 years. He had the deed. He had the federal survey. He had records of every tax payment he'd made to the territorial authority. What Silas Greer had was money connections to the county judge, and a story he'd been telling for 2 years that Cole's purchase had been fraudulent, that the sale had never been properly recorded, that the land was in dispute, and the territorial commissioner ought to revisit it. "Has the commissioner been notified?" Abigail asked. She was reading through the papers with the focused attention of someone who understood documents. "I filed a response 2 years ago. It went nowhere." "Who handled it?" "Lawyer in Butte. He took my money and did approximately nothing." She looked up. "You have copies of everything you filed." "In that chest." He nodded toward the wooden chest under the window. "Get it out." He brought the chest to the table, and she went through it systematically. He sat across from her and watched. She was aware of his watching, not uncomfortable, just aware. He had the quality of stillness that some men have, the kind that isn't passive but concentrated, like a man who has learned that watching carefully is a form of action. "Here," she said, pulling out a document. "This is your original filing. It was addressed to the Territorial Land Office in Helena." "Right. There's no response in here. Did you receive one?" "Not in writing. The lawyer said he'd spoken to someone at the office who'd said the matter was being reviewed." She looked at him. "A lawyer told you verbally that someone at a government office said verbally that your land dispute was being reviewed." He heard the problem in the way she said it. His jaw tightened. "I know. You need everything in writing. Every communication going forward needs to be documented. You need to file a formal complaint with the Territorial Commissioner's office directly, not through a lawyer who does nothing, and you need to request a written confirmation that your original deed has been registered." She set the paper down. "You also need witnesses." "What kind of witnesses?" "Anyone who can attest to your use and occupancy of the high pasture. Ranchers whose land borders yours. Anyone who's done business with you up here. Anyone who can say under oath, if necessary, that you've been running cattle on this land continuously for 6 years." Cole was quiet for a moment. "There are men who'd speak to that. Neighbors who know the history. Then we need to reach them, write letters, formal requests for supporting affidavits." She set down another paper. "This is winnable, Mr. Bennett. The legal foundation is solid. What you've been missing is someone to hold the paperwork together and push." He looked at her across the table. "You sound certain of that." "I am certain of that. I've read every document in this chest, and the law is on your side. The only question is whether you pursue it hard enough that Greer can't ignore it." She met his gaze. "He's been counting on you running out of steam. That's his whole strategy. Wear you down until you give up or get hurt badly enough to leave. He's not going to expect you to come back with a proper filing and 6 signed affidavits." Cole was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the afternoon light shifted slightly. "Why do you understand all this?" he asked. She sorted the papers back into order before answering. "My father had a land dispute when I was 12. Neighbor tried to claim our east field. My mother, she was the smart one. My mother, she went through every record herself. Read the county statutes. Filed the responses. Won." She paused. "She was a school teacher before she married my father. She always said that knowing how to read was only useful if you also knew what to do with what you read." Cole looked at her with something new in his expression. "She sounds like someone worth knowing." "She was," Abigail said. "She really was." They fell into a pattern within 3 days. She was up before him in the mornings. He rose early, but she rose earlier. Something left over from the farm, and then from teaching school, when she'd learned that the first hour of the day was the only quiet hour she got. She made coffee on the wood stove and had it ready when he came in from checking the cattle, and neither of them mentioned this arrangement because it wasn't an arrangement they'd discussed. It was just what happened. Mornings were for the paperwork. She drafted letters to the Territorial Land Office in Helena, to the Commissioner's Office, to the County Clerk in Silver Creek, in the careful, precise language she'd learned watching her mother, and refined in 3 years of writing school board correspondence. Cole read everything she wrote before she sent it, and occasionally changed a word or phrase. Once she changed one back. "That's not how you say it," he told her. "It's exactly how you say it when you want a government official to take you seriously," she said. "Officiously formal, no contractions, lots of respectfully submitted." He looked at her. "Trust me," she said. He did. She didn't take that lightly. The afternoons were his domain. He was on the land working riding, doing the physical labor of keeping a cattle operation running solo. Mending fences, moving animals, checking water sources. She went with him when she could, partly to understand the geography they were fighting over. Partly because, though she would not have said this aloud, she found that she thought better when she was moving. How was a good teacher when he wanted to be? Patient. Clear. He showed her things without making her feel ignorant for not knowing them. How to read the grass to understand where the water ran underground. How to check a fence post for rot. How to approach a spooked animal so it felt the calm before it saw the person. "You're good with the horses," he said one afternoon. She'd been brushing down the roan gelding after a ride, and she'd done it the way he'd shown her, rather than the way she'd been doing it since childhood, because his way was better. "I grew up with horses," she said. "You grew up on a farm, and you used to ride. Until my father sold the horses to cover a bad year. I was 15. She kept brushing. We kept walking after that. He was quiet. Then, "You've had some hard years." "So have you," she said. Not combative, just accurate. "Fair enough," he said, and went back to what he was doing. But she noticed that the next morning when she was writing the letter to the land commissioner, and she misspelled a word and swore under her breath because she'd have to copy the whole page again. Cole got up from the chair where he'd been reading and put a fresh sheet of paper in front of her without being asked. She didn't comment on it. Neither did he. It was on the 5th day that she found the ledger. She'd been looking for a blank book to use for tracking correspondence dates, sent responses received what needed following up, and she'd searched the wooden chest and found nothing suitable. She asked Cole if he had anything else, and he pointed her toward the shelf under the window, where there were several folded-over papers and a couple of bound books she hadn't examined yet. The ledger was there. She pulled it out thinking it was blank, opened it, and found it wasn't. It was an accounting book. Years of entries careful and detailed. Land acquisition records, cattle sale records, supply purchases, seasonal income and loss. Not the records of a man scraping by. The numbers were modest in scale, but methodical in management, the kind of records kept by someone who'd been thinking long-term for a very long time. She was still reading when Cole came in. He stopped when he saw what she was holding. For a moment, just a moment, something flashed across his face that she couldn't quite read. Not anger. Closer to the expression of a man whose privacy had been entered unexpectedly, and who was deciding in real time how he felt about it. "I was looking for a blank book," she said. She held it out to him. "I wasn't prying." He took it, looked at it, put it back on the shelf. "It's all right," he said. "You've been keeping records for," she hesitated, "a long time. 8 years. She did the arithmetic. 8 years of careful land management, modest but consistent cattle sales, methodical reinvestment. She'd only seen a few pages, but she'd read enough to understand the shape of it. "Cole," she said carefully, "are you in as much financial difficulty as you've let on?" He sat down at the table, folded his hands on the surface in front of him, looked at them for a moment. "Define difficulty," he said. "You told May you couldn't pay her for the room and meals until you'd sorted out the land situation." "That's true. But the cattle sales last fall are in a separate account," he said, "in a bank in Helena, under a different name." He looked up. "Not a false name. My mother's name. Bennett is my father's name. My mother's family name was Reese." Abigail was very still. "Why would you do that?" I was quiet for a long moment. the kind of quiet that precedes something real. Because Greer's been coming at me for 2 years, he said finally. And one of the first things he did was try to put pressure on the bank in Silver Creek where I kept my operating account. Called in a favor from someone. Had the account frozen for 3 weeks while his lawyer filed a challenge to the land deed. His jaw was tight. I lost a cattle sale because I couldn't access the funds to pay for transport. I nearly lost 2 contracts. He paused. After that, I moved the main account. Something I couldn't lose, I put somewhere it couldn't be touched. She stared at him. So the broke cowboy story isn't entirely a story. The operating account genuinely is strained right now. But the core holdings are... He stopped. Secure. She finished. Yes. She sat down across from him slowly. Her mind was moving fast, sorting through implications. Does anyone know about the Helena account? No one. Then Greer doesn't know about it. No. That's good, she said. That's actually very good. If he knew there was money beyond his reach, he'd escalate. He's been operating on the assumption that he can starve you out financially. She looked at him steadily. How long could you hold on? A long time, he said. Longer than he expects. There was something new in the room now. Something that had shifted slightly between them. He'd told her something he'd told no one else. She understood that, and she understood the weight of it, and she was careful with it. All right, she said. Then we don't just play defense. We take this to Helena ourselves, in person. File a formal complaint directly with the commissioner's office, present the survey documents, and request an inquiry into Greer's conduct. Cole looked at her. That's aggressive. He's been cutting you with knives and calling it a land dispute, she said. Aggressive is appropriate. Something shifted in his expression again. That same look, the one she'd seen in May's storeroom, when she'd said she was tired of being looked at like furniture. Recognition. The expression of a man who has met someone who sees things the way he sees them. I'll need a week to prepare the filing, she said. You'll have it, he said. Sure. The week was when things changed. Not dramatically. Not with anything that could be pointed to and named. It was the accumulation of small things, the way a creek becomes a river. So gradually that you don't notice the transition. Only the fact that you're standing in something deeper than you were before. She burned the biscuits on Wednesday morning. She'd been so focused on drafting the complaint letter that she'd left them in the oven too long, and when she pulled them out, they were solid and charred on the bottom, and she stood there holding the pan with the specific frustration of someone who was competent at most things and hated failing at any of them. Cole came in from outside, took one look at the pan, and said nothing. He went to the shelf, pulled out a knife, and cut the bottoms off both biscuits with brisk efficiency. Set the edible halves on the table, put the pan down, and went back to pour himself coffee. They're still edible, he said. She looked at the trimmed biscuits. She looked at him. You didn't have to do that. I've eaten worse. That's not the point. I know what the point is, he said. He sat down. You worked until past midnight last night on that letter. You were tired this morning. Biscuits burn when you're tired. It happens. She sat down across from him. The trimmed biscuits were actually fine. The centers were well done, and they tasted all right with the butter she'd brought up from the provisions. They ate without speaking for a while. My mother used to say that a person who can't forgive themselves a burnt biscuit won't be able to forgive anyone else much of anything either, Cole said. She looked up. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She was too good for my father, and she knew it and stayed anyway. He said it without bitterness, just fact. She said she stayed because of the land, because she loved the mountain. I used to think that was sad. He paused. I understand it better now. You love this land, she said. I do. Is that why you're fighting so hard for it? He thought about it honestly. Partly. Partly because Greer is wrong, and I don't take well to wrong things winning. He looked at her. And partly because this is going to sound foolish. Tell me anyway. My mother is buried up here, small plot back behind the tree line. I visit it on the 1st of every month. His voice didn't waver, but something in it went quieter. If I lose this land, I lose access to that plot. Greer would fence it off or worse. And He stopped. I won't let that happen. Abigail was quiet for a long moment. Something was moving through her chest. Not pity, she wouldn't insult him with pity, but something close to its better neighbor. We won't let that happen, she said. He looked at her, the gray eyes steady, serious. No, he said. We won't. The first real trouble arrived on Friday. She was alone at the cabin Cole had ridden out to the far fence line, a 2-hour ride each way, when she heard horses coming up the road. More than one. She went to the window and looked out and counted 3 riders, and she didn't recognize any of them, and they were riding with the particular deliberateness she'd seen in the 2 men who'd come to May's kitchen. She did not panic. She thought about panicking and decided against it as a practical matter. She went to the wooden chest and removed the legal documents, deed survey, all of it, and wrapped them in the oilcloth she'd found in Cole's provisions chest and put them inside the flour canister, which she pushed to the back of the shelf. Then she put the correspondence ledger she'd been keeping, dates, filings, every letter sent, into the bottom of her valise under her spare dress. Then she stood at the table, arranged her face into something neutral, and waited. They knocked. She thought that was interesting. Men who'd come to intimidate usually didn't bother to knock. She opened the door. The man in the front was not one of the 2 from May's kitchen. He was older, heavy-set, with the clothes of a man who spent some of his time indoors, a vest, a watch chain, boots with less trail dust than his companions. His face was broad and weathered, and he had the practiced pleasantness of a man who'd learned that smiling made things easier. Miss Carter, he said. My name is Silas Greer. I wonder if I might have a word. She kept her face very still. Mr. Bennett isn't here. I know that, he said. I'd like a word with you. She stepped back from the doorway, not inviting him in, just removing herself as an obstacle. He took it as an invitation and came inside. His 2 men stayed with the horses, which was something. Greer looked around the cabin slowly. His eyes found the shelf, the table. The papers on the table. She'd left a few non-critical documents out deliberately enough to look normal, not enough to be useful. You've been busy, he said pleasantly. I've been working, she agreed. You've been filing correspondence with the Territorial Land Office. He said it the way a man says something he already knew and wants you to know he already knew. I have friends in Helena, Miss Carter. They let me know when things arrive. Her heart rate went up, but her face didn't move. That's not surprising. Most people file paperwork for a reason. What reason would a school teacher from Missouri have for filing paperwork about a land dispute in Montana? I work for Mr. Bennett, she said. I handle his correspondence. That's what I was hired to do. Greer studied her. The pleasantness was still there, professionally maintained, but underneath it, she could feel the actual thing. He was the weight of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Miss Carter, he said. I'm going to be honest with you because I respect a straightforward person. He sat down in the chair across from the table, Cole's chair, without being invited, and crossed one leg over the other. Bennett's a stubborn man, stubborn in a way that's going to cost him significantly if he keeps on this path. The land in dispute isn't worth what he's putting into this fight, not from a practical standpoint. He'd be better served taking what I've offered, a fair price for the high pasture, and moving on. What price did you offer? She asked. $400. She kept her expression composed. $400 was not a fair price. Not for 240 acres of summer pasture. And what did he say? He refused, twice. Greer looked at her directly. He's going to refuse again, and then things are going to become more unpleasant than they need to be. For him, and for anyone in his association. A pause. Just long enough. Including people who are relatively new to the area and might find it difficult to secure employment again if the right people had something to say about their character. There it was. She let the silence sit for a moment. Let him think he'd landed that where he intended. Then she said, Mr. Greer, I appreciate you being direct. In that spirit, let me be direct as well. She looked at him steadily across the table. What you just said to me, implying that my employment would be jeopardized by retaliatory action on your part, is something I am going to write down. The exact words, the approximate time, the date, and the names of any witnesses present. She paused. Attempted intimidation of a party to a land dispute is something the Territorial Commissioner's Office takes an interest in. So does the Federal Marshal's Office in Helena, which I will be writing to Monday morning. Greer's pleasantness didn't disappear, but it changed quality, went a degree colder. "You're bold for a woman in a difficult situation," he said. "I came to Silver Creek with nothing," she said. "You can't threaten a person who has nothing left to lose, Mr. Greer. It's the fundamental miscalculation people like you keep making about people like me." He stood, adjusted his vest. The men outside had probably heard some of that, and she thought he was aware of it. "Think carefully about the position you're putting yourself in," he said. "I have," she said. "Good afternoon." I was gone when Cola came back. She told him everything immediately, without dramatics, sitting across from him at the table, with the correspondence ledger open between them, where she'd already written it all down. Cole listened. His face went through several things she watched carefully. Anger controlled, but real. And something beneath the anger that was harder to name. "He threatened you," he said when she'd finished. "He implied a threat. He was careful about it. There's a difference legally. Abigail." He said her name for the first time. Not Miss Carter. Her name. "He came up here to threaten you because of me." "He came up here because he's afraid of the filing," she said. "That means we're doing something right. It means he's escalating and you're in the middle of it." I was already in the middle of it the moment I started writing those letters. She met his gaze. "I knew what I was signing on for, Cole. I'm not asking you to feel responsible." "I am responsible." "No. What you are is the person whose name is on the deed, and whose cattle are on the high pasture, and whose mother is buried behind the tree line." She let that sit for a second. "I am a person who chose to be here. Those are different things." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in him was working. She could see it, the internal reckoning of a man deciding how much to let himself be moved by something. "You hid the documents," he said. "In the flour canister. They're fine." He looked at the canister on the shelf, looked back at her. "You thought to do that while he was on his way up." "I thought to do it the moment I saw 3 riders coming up a private mountain road unannounced." Another moment of that reckoning. "You've got more sense than most men I've worked with," he said. It came out rough and genuine, not a compliment he'd planned, but one he'd arrived at accidentally, the best kind. "That's a low bar," she said, "but I'll take it." He almost smiled. She was learning the shape of his almost smiles, the small tells, the slight shift at the corner of his mouth, the change in the lines around his eyes. "Monday we ride to Helena," he said. "It's a 2-day ride. Then we leave Sunday. I'll have the filing ready." He nodded. Then he got up and got the flour canister down from the shelf and opened it and checked the oilcloth package inside. Put it back. Put the canister back. Stood at the shelf for a moment with his back to her. "Abigail," he said. He didn't turn around. "Yes." "I'm glad May sent for you." He said it quietly, like something he'd been working up to. "I'm glad you came." She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, at the man who'd built a life up here alone on the mountain and kept his mother's books and buried her behind the tree line and fought a 2-year legal battle because he refused to let a wrong thing win. "So am I," she said. "Now eat something. You look like you haven't stopped moving since morning." He turned then, and there was the not quite smile, fuller than usual this time. "Yes, ma'am," he said. That night, after the lamp was out and the curtain drawn between their spaces, Abigail lay awake in the dark and listened to the sound of the mountain wind through the pine trees, the distant sound of the cattle, the particular deep silence that exists under all the other sounds in a place that hasn't been civilized yet. She thought about Silas Greer's face when she'd told him she had nothing left to lose. She thought about whether that was still true, and she wasn't entirely sure it was. She thought about the flour canister, the letters she'd written, the ledger under her dress in the bottom of her valise, the way Cole had said her name, the way he'd stood at the shelf with his back to her, saying the thing he'd needed to say in the way that a man who doesn't say things easily finally says them. She thought about two people who'd both been left with nothing by different hands, by different failures, and the particular way those people understood each other without having to explain. She wasn't in love with him. She was careful to be honest with herself about that. This was too new and too complicated, and she'd been wrong about the shape of things before. But there was something here that she didn't have a clean word for. Something that felt like the beginning of being anchored. The beginning of the world becoming the right size. Sunday morning they would ride to Helena. They would file the papers. They would fight Silas Greer on ground he hadn't expected with weapons he hadn't anticipated, and they would do it together. She closed her eyes. The mountain went on making its sounds around her. For the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she was not afraid of what came next. They left before sunrise on Sunday. Abigail had the oilcloth package strapped inside her travel bag, the correspondence ledger wrapped in her spare dress, and 3 days' worth of provisions packed into the saddlebag Cole had set out the night before. She hadn't slept much. She could tell from the way he moved that he hadn't either that particular economy of motion a person adopts when they're running on less rest than they need but won't admit it. They rode down the mountain in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that two people fall into when they've run out of small things to say, and the large things aren't ready yet. The air was cool at that hour, the last of the night still clinging to the lower slopes, and the trail required enough attention that conversation would have been a distraction anyway. It was only when they reached the valley road and the horses settled into an easy traveling pace that Cole spoke. "I need to tell you something about Helena," he said. She looked at him sideways. "Tell me." "My brother lives there. Older brother, Nathaniel." He kept his eyes on the road. "He's a lawyer." She waited. "We don't speak," Cole said. "Haven't in 4 years." "What happened?" A long pause. Not evasion, she'd learned the difference between his pauses. This one was the kind where a man is deciding how to say something accurately. "When my father died, he left the High Pine Ranch equally between us. That was the original ranch, the one I grew up on north of Silver Creek. Nathaniel wanted to sell. I didn't. We fought about it for 6 months, and then Nathaniel found a buyer and pushed the sale through with a legal maneuver I didn't see coming." His jaw tightened. He had the right to do it, technically, but it wasn't right. My mother was barely 2 years in the ground, and he sold the place she'd loved her whole life to a cattle company that tore down the house within a month. Abigail absorbed that. "So the High Pine is gone. The name is gone. The land is still there. Someone else's cattle on it now." He paused. "I took the money from my half of the sale and bought the high pasture and walked away from Nathaniel and didn't look back. And now you need to go to Helena where he lives." "I don't need to see him," Cole said. "Helena's a city. I can file with the commissioner's office without running into my brother." She thought about the flatness with which he'd said that, the careful certainty of it. "What does Nathaniel do in Helena?" she asked. "Contract law mostly. Territorial land transactions." Cole's voice was very controlled. "He knows the commissioner's office. He's worked with them." She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. "Cole, don't. If he knows the commissioner's office and he's a contract lawyer who specializes in territorial land transactions, Abigail, he could help us, significantly." The silence that followed was the loudest one she'd heard from him yet. "No," Cole said. "I'm not saying it has to be pleasant. I'm saying it might be necessary." I said no. She didn't push, not yet. She filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept the things that weren't finished yet, and watched the road unspool ahead of them, and let the morning come up around them, in full. They made 15 miles before noon, and stopped at a creek crossing to water the horses, and eat something standing up. The way people eat when they're moving, and don't want to admit they're tired yet. She handed him a biscuit, a good one made the night before, not burnt, and he took it without comment, and ate it, and handed her the canteen. "Tell me about Nathaniel," she said. He looked at her. "I just told you." "You told me what happened. I'm asking who he is." Cole chewed his biscuit, looked at the water moving over the rocks in the creek. "Smart," he said finally. Smarter than me, probably in the courtroom way. Reads everything. Remembers everything. Our mother used to say he had a filing cabinet where other people had a heart. He paused. She didn't mean it harshly. She loved him. She just understood him. Did he love her? Yes. No hesitation. That's the part that makes it worse. He loved her. He just loved the idea of a clean financial transaction more. What about you? Does he respect you? Cole was quiet. Cole. He respects the fact that I'm still standing, he said finally. He expected me to fail after I bought the high pasture. Go broke in 2 years, come crawling back. I think it bothers him that I haven't. She filed that away too. What would he do if you walked into his office with a federal land dispute documented evidence of intimidation and a wrongful filing by a man named Silas Greer, who's been pressuring the county judge? Cole turned to look at her fully. She met his gaze and held it. He'd see a case, Cole said slowly. He'd see all the ways it could be won. Would he take it? The pause was longer this time. I don't know. Would he refuse it to spite you? A shorter pause. No. Whatever he is, he's not petty. He doesn't do spite. Cole looked away again. He does principle. His principle. Which is what makes it so infuriating. He genuinely believes he did the right thing with the high pine. He'd argue it to his dying day. Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then, he doesn't have to have been right then for him to be useful now. Cole didn't answer, but he also didn't say no again. They rode into Helena on the second evening with the light going gold and the city spreading out around them in that particular way of a territorial capital that has been built fast by people who expected to need more of everything very soon. She'd never been to Helena. It was larger than she'd expected, more settled, more commercial, more Eastern feeling in its ambitions. Cole knew the city well enough to navigate without asking. He found them a boarding house on a quiet street. Separate rooms he specified at the desk, and paid in advance with cash. He produced from an inside coat pocket, and she noted that he paid without hesitation, which meant the operating account strain he'd mentioned was not as acute as he sometimes let on. At dinner in the boarding house dining room, he said, "The commissioner's office opens at 9 tomorrow morning. Then we should be there at 9, she said. I'll go alone. You can wait." "I'm coming with you," she said. "I wrote the filing. I know it better than you do." He didn't argue. She looked at him across the table. And then we wait for a response. That could take weeks, months. I know. We could shorten that timeline, she said carefully, if we had someone inside the process. Someone who knew the right people to speak to in the right order. He put down his fork. "Abigail, I'm just noting the fact. I heard you noting it 3 times today. It keeps being a fact." He picked his fork back up, said nothing. But she saw his jaw working slightly, the internal argument going on behind his eyes, and she let it work. Some things a person had to come to on their own schedule. The commissioner's office was exactly as she'd imagined. Formal, slightly chaotic, staffed by men who'd cultivated the bureaucratic skill of looking busy while moving slowly. They waited 40 minutes before a clerk took their paperwork and looked through it and told them it would be reviewed and a response sent within 60 days. 60 days. Cole kept his face neutral. She kept hers neutral. They walked back out into the morning sun and stood on the street for a moment. 60 days, she said. I heard him. He said, I heard him. Greer's men cut you 2 months ago. In 60 days they could... I know what 60 days means, Cole said. His voice was controlled but tight. I also know there's no forcing a government office to move faster than it wants to. She looked down the street. She looked at the sign 3 blocks away that said, Nathaniel R. Bennett, Attorney at Law. She'd seen it when they rode in. She'd said nothing. She said nothing now either. Cole saw where she was looking. His whole body went still. It's your decision, she said quietly. I won't push again. The silence stretched. A wagon passed. Somewhere up the street, a horse objected to something. the ordinary sounds of a city going about its business, indifferent to the particular weight of this particular moment. "He'll be insufferable," Cole said. "Almost certainly. He'll find a way to turn it into something I owe him. Maybe. He won't apologize for the high pine." "No," she agreed. "He probably won't." Cole looked at the sign. Looked at it for a long time. "My mother is buried on that land," he said. Not to her, to himself, or maybe to his mother. I told her when she was dying that no matter what happened, I'd keep it. I'd hold on to it." He stopped. "I don't break promises I make to dead people." He started walking toward the sign. She fell into step beside him, half a pace back, because this was his walk to make, and matched her stride to his, without another word. The office of Nathaniel R. Bennett was organized with the precision of a man who considered disorder a moral failing. The desk was clear except for a neat stack of files. The bookshelves were alphabetized. Even the light coming through the window seemed to have been arranged by preference. Nathaniel Bennett stood up when they came in. He was several years older than Cole, built along similar lines, but leaner, with the kind of face that had learned to reveal nothing during professional hours. His eyes went from Cole to Abigail and back to Cole, with a speed that told her he was exactly as sharp as Cole had said. The silence between the two brothers was its own full conversation. "Cole," Nathaniel said finally. "Nathaniel," Cole said. Neither of them moved toward the other. Abigail stepped forward and extended her hand. "I'm Abigail Carter. I work for your brother. I handle his land office correspondence." Nathaniel took her hand. His grip was measured appropriate, the handshake of a man who understood that it communicated things. "Miss Carter." He looked at Cole. "You hired help." "I hired someone competent," Cole said. "There's a distinction." "Clearly." Nathaniel gestured at the chairs across from his desk. "Sit down and tell me why you're here, since you wouldn't have come unless the situation was serious enough to override your better judgment." They sat. Abigail placed the oilcloth package on the desk and unwrapped it. Nathaniel watched her do it with the particular attention of a man who assessed situations by how people handled objects. "Silas Greer," Cole said. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression. Very small, very controlled, but she caught it. "You know that name," she said. Nathaniel looked at her. "Greer has done business in Helena. He has significant connections to the commissioner's office." A pause. "What has he done?" she told him. All of it: the 2-year campaign to dispute the high pasture deed, the frozen bank account, the physical confrontation, the visit to the cabin, the threat to her own position. She told it in the order it happened, concisely, without embellishment. Nathaniel listened with his hands flat on the desk and his face professionally still, and she saw him processing it, the way a mind like his processed things, categorizing, identifying the legally significant points, building the structure of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the deed from the stack of papers. "Read it." Put it down and picked up the survey. "Read that too." "This survey is federal," he said. "Yes," she said. 1875. Conducted by a federal surveyor out of the territorial office. A federal survey supersedes the county judge's jurisdiction entirely. He looked at Cole. "Did your lawyer in Butte know this?" He should have. But he didn't file it as a federal matter. He filed it as a county dispute. Cole's jaw tightened. "Yes." Nathaniel set the survey down carefully. "That lawyer," he said, "either didn't understand what he had or was paid not to understand." The room went very quiet. "Paid," Cole said slowly. "Greer has money, and he has reach," Nathaniel said. "A lawyer in Butte who takes a land dispute case and deliberately files it at the wrong jurisdictional level, ensuring it goes nowhere, that's not incompetence. Not with a document this clear." He looked at both of them. "This isn't a county matter, and it never should have been treated as one. This is a federal land dispute. It goes to the federal land commissioner, not the territorial office." Abigail felt something cold move through her. "We filed with the territorial commissioner this morning." "Then you filed in the right spirit, but the wrong jurisdiction." He paused. "It's not fatal. We can redirect. But we need to move quickly, Because Greer's contact in the territorial office will have flagged your filing by this afternoon. How do you know he has a contact there? Nathaniel looked at her with the expression of a man choosing his words. Because 18 months ago, a rancher from outside Billings came to my office with a situation almost identical to yours. Federal Survey valid deed 2-year harassment campaign by a larger interest. By the time he reached me, Greer's contact had already buried his territorial filing. He paused again. I couldn't save that case. The rancher lost the land. The weight of that settled on all three of them. Cole's voice was very even when he spoke. You've seen Greer do this before. I've seen the aftermath, Nathaniel said. I didn't know his name until now. He looked at his brother steadily. You should have come to me 2 years ago. You know why I didn't? Yes. Nathaniel's voice was flat. I know why you didn't. And we can address that separately or not at all as you prefer. But right now, we have a more urgent problem. He stood and went to his bookshelf and pulled out a thick volume federal land codes. She could read the spine and brought it back to the desk. There is a mechanism, he said, opening the book to a marked page that suggested he'd been here before under the Federal Land Act of 1870 for an emergency injunction against a disputed land seizure while a federal investigation is pending. It requires evidence of ongoing physical harassment, documented intimidation, and a valid prior claim. He looked up. You have all three. An injunction would stop Greer from moving on the land, Abigail said. While the federal case is heard, yes. He couldn't touch the high pasture, couldn't fence it, couldn't claim it. Any action he took would be in direct violation of federal order. He looked at Cole. Do you have the records Miss Carter mentioned? The bank account interference, the physical confrontation. She has the records, Cole said. Both men looked at her. She opened the correspondence ledger. Dated entries from the first filing 2 years ago to present. Bank account interference documented by the bank manager's written statement, which I requested through the mail 3 weeks ago. She pulled it out from between the pages. The confrontation at the cabin witnessed by myself, which is one witness which I understand may not be sufficient alone. It's sufficient as corroboration, Nathaniel said. He was reading the bank manager's statement, and she could see from his expression that it was better than he'd expected. Where did you get this? I wrote to the bank manager in Silver Creek and explained that I was compiling documentation for a federal filing. I asked him to provide a written account of the account freeze and the name of the party who'd requested it. She paused. He named Greer's lawyer. Nathaniel set the statement down and looked at her with the steady assessing expression of a man recalibrating. You did this on your own initiative, he said. Yes. Before you knew you'd be filing federally. Good documentation, she said, is good documentation regardless of jurisdiction. My mother taught me that. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Cole. Where did you find her? May's kitchen in Silver Creek, Cole said. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, something quiet and layered. She was having a bad week. She's competent, Nathaniel said with the directness of a man who handed out that word carefully. I know. Abigail kept her face composed. Gentlemen, the injunction. They spent 4 hours in Nathaniel's office. How was everything Cole had described? Sharp, organized, precise, and possessed of the particular infuriating quality of a man who was almost always right and knew it. He asked questions with the efficiency of someone who billed by the hour. He made notes in a handwriting so small and neat it barely looked human. He argued about the wording of 2 of her letters, and she argued back, and he conceded one point, and she conceded the other. And she saw Cole watching this exchange with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Near the end, while Nathaniel was drafting the injunction petition, Cole stepped out to check on the horses. Nathaniel kept writing. The scratching of the pen filled the room. He told you about the high pine, Nathaniel said without looking up. Yes. What he told you would have been his version. I understand that versions differ, she said. Nathaniel glanced up. My version is that the land was going to be lost anyway. Our father's debts were significant. The cattle company's offer was the only one that would have cleared the estate, and left anything for either of us. Cole's version is that I betrayed the family. He paused. Both things can be true simultaneously. She looked at him. Did you tell him that about the debts? He didn't want to hear it. He wanted to keep the ranch. He wanted to believe it was possible. Nathaniel put the pen down briefly. Cole has always believed that wanting something badly enough is sufficient. It's his greatest strength and his most significant flaw. She thought about that. About a man who'd bought a mountain pasture with the money from a sale he'd hated and built something alone and held on for 6 years because he'd made a promise to a grave. Maybe, she said. Or maybe some things are worth wanting that badly. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, not softened. He wasn't a man who softened easily, but adjusted. He brought you here, he said. Cole doesn't bring people anywhere. He doesn't. He stopped. He doesn't trust people, she said. Not easily. Not since our father. Not since our mother. He picked the pen back up. Whatever you've done in the time you've been working for him, Miss Carter, it appears to have made an impression. She didn't answer that. She looked at the injunction petition taking shape on the page and made herself focus on the work. Cole came back in, looked at the petition, looked at his brother. Is it enough? He asked. For the injunction, yes. Nathaniel signed his name at the bottom, with the authority of a man who understood what his signature meant in this territory. For the full federal case, we'll need more. Specifically, he hesitated. Say it, Cole said. We'll need a witness to Greer's original interference with the county records, the filing that started this. Someone who was present when his lawyer submitted the fraudulent challenge to your deed. He looked at his papers. According to Miss Carter's documentation, the original challenge was filed by Greer's lawyer with the county clerk in Silver Creek. Earl Dobbins, Abigail said. She'd seen the name in the correspondence. Earl Dobbins was the county clerk at the time, Nathaniel confirmed. He retired 8 months ago. Do you know where he went? I don't, she said. But I know someone who might. She was thinking of May. May knew everyone's business. If Dobbins was present when Greer's lawyer filed that fraudulent challenge, Nathaniel said, and if he's willing to testify to what he saw, it breaks the whole chain, Abigail said. It does. He looked at Cole. It establishes that Greer knew the deed was valid and filed the challenge anyway. That's not a civil matter anymore. That's fraud. Federal fraud. The room went very quiet. Cole looked at his brother across the desk. 4 years of silence sitting in the space between them. The high pine and their mother's grave, and the money and the principle that Nathaniel had called it, and the betrayal that Cole had called it, and all the years of stubborn distance since. Will you file the injunction? Cole asked. I already drafted it, Nathaniel said. I mean, will you take the case, the whole case? Nathaniel was quiet for exactly the amount of time that meant the answer wasn't simple. The federal case could take 6 months, he said. Possibly a year. Greer will fight it. He'll spend money to fight it, which means he'll hire good people. He paused. I charge by the hour, Cole. I know what you charge. And you can cover it. I can cover it. Nathaniel studied his brother. You're more solvent than I thought. You thought wrong about several things, Cole said. Not cruel, just accurate. Something shifted in Nathaniel's face, the briefest thing gone almost before it was there. Not quite guilt. The closest a man like Nathaniel probably came to it. Then yes, he said. I'll take the case. Cole nodded once. He didn't say thank you. Nathaniel didn't expect it. They understood each other at that frequency. She thought the brothers who'd loved the same mother and fought over the same land and gone 4 years without speaking, they understood each other in the exact way that people who've hurt each other deeply sometimes do. They were back at the boarding house by evening. She was sitting at the small desk in her room, writing a letter to May about Earl Dobbins when the knock came at her door. She knew it was Cole. Come in, she said. He came in. Stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand, which meant he was feeling something he wasn't sure how to say. She'd learned that about him. The hat came off when the situation required more of him than usual. That went better than I expected, he said. It went well, she agreed. Nathaniel is... He stopped. Exactly what you needed, she said. Whether or not he's everything you wanted. He looked at her, that gray gaze steady and deep. He said you made an impression, Cole said. He's efficient with his compliments. I respected that. Abigail. Her name again. He said it differently now than he had before, with a weight to it that hadn't been there in the beginning. When we get back to Silver Creek, Greer's going to know we went to Helena. He's going to know we filed federally. He'll know about Nathaniel. Yes. He's going to come at us harder. I know. I need you to understand what that means. This isn't just paperwork anymore. She turned in her chair to face him fully. I understood that before I hid the documents in the flour canister. I understood it when I looked at Silas Greer across your table and told him he couldn't threaten a person with nothing left to lose. She paused. But Cole, I have something to lose now. I'm aware of that. And I'm still here. He looked at her. The hat turned in his hands once the nervous habit she'd noticed on the day she'd asked him about his mother. Why? He asked. The same question he'd asked on the first day in the storeroom at May's when she'd offered to help. This time the answer was different. She knew the difference, and so did he. Because that mountain is the right size, she said quietly. Because your mother's grave is behind the tree line, and someone ought to stay and keep a promise like that. And because... She stopped herself. Because... He pressed. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who'd come down from the mountain broken and let her put him back together and then let her into his life piece by careful piece, and who stood in her doorway now with his hat in his hands because he had something to say that he didn't quite know how to say. Because I stopped being afraid of what comes next, she said. And I think that might be because of you. The room was very quiet. Cole took one step forward. Just one. He wasn't a man who rushed things. He wasn't a man who declared things he wasn't certain of. When this is over, he said. His voice was rough with everything he wasn't fully saying. When Greer is dealt with and the land is secure and the case is closed. Ask me then, she said. Whatever you're working up to, ask me then, when we've earned the answer. He looked at her for a long time, then he nodded, put his hat back on. Good night, Abigail. Good night, Cole. He went. She turned back to her letter to May about Earl Dobbins and the county records and the case they were building brick by careful brick. Her hand was steady. Her mind was clear. Outside, Helena went on with its evening, and somewhere in that city, Nathaniel Bennett was adding a new file to his alphabetized shelf, and somewhere north of here, the mountain waited with its pines and its pasture and the small grave behind the tree line. The next morning, they would begin the ride back. They would carry an injunction and a federal case and the name of a witness they needed to find. They would ride back into the territory. Greer thought he controlled, and they would do it together. And this time, Silas Greer would find out what it meant to underestimate the wrong two people. She finished the letter and sealed it and set it on the corner of the desk and blew out the lamp. In the dark, she allowed herself one clear thought before sleep. She had come to Silver Creek with nothing. She was going back with considerably more. May's letter came back in 4 days. Abigail read it standing at the table in the cabin, still in her riding coat, the horses barely unsaddled from the return trip down the mountain. Cole stood across from her and watched her face because he'd learned that her face told him things before she decided to say them. Earl Dobbins, she said. He's in Bozeman. May says he's living with his daughter's family. She got the address from the postmaster. She looked up. She also says that 2 days after we left for Helena, 3 of Greer's men rode through Silver Creek asking questions about us. Who we'd spoken to, where we'd gone. Cole's jaw tightened. He knows. He knows we went to Helena. He doesn't know about Nathaniel yet, or about the federal filing. May says the men didn't look satisfied when they left, which means they didn't get useful information. She folded the letter. But he'll find out. The territorial office will have flagged our redirect to the federal commissioner. He has people there. How long do we have? She thought about it honestly. A week, maybe less. Once he understands it's gone federal and that there's an injunction pending, he'll move fast. He can't touch the land while the injunction holds, but he'll try to discredit the case before it gets legs. She set the letter down. We need Dobbins. Bozeman is 3 days' ride. Then we leave tomorrow. Cole looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not hesitation, more like the expression of a man calculating costs he hadn't anticipated. You just rode 2 days to Helena and 2 days back. I'm aware of that. Abigail. Cole. She said his name the way he said hers, with the weight of everything that had accumulated between them. Earl Dobbins is the difference between a strong federal case and an airtight one. If he saw Greer's lawyer file that fraudulent challenge, and if he'll say so under oath, Greer doesn't just lose the land dispute, he faces federal fraud charges. That ends this. Permanently. She paused. I can ride to Bozeman. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and started unsaddling his horse properly, which was his way of agreeing. We leave at first light, he said. I'll write to Nathaniel tonight, she said. He needs to know we're going for Dobbins. She was already at the table, already reaching for paper, before he'd finished with the horse. He watched her for a moment, the particular focus she brought to everything she did, the way her pen moved across the page with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what needed saying, and he turned back to the horse and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that the watching hadn't already said. They were 2 hours down the mountain the next morning when the rider caught up with them. He came fast, which meant urgency, and Cole put his hand up to slow the horses before they knew who it was. The rider turned out to be a young man named Pete Sorrells, whose family ran cattle in the valley below the high pasture, and who Cole had known for years. Pete pulled up hard. He was breathing like he'd been riding at a run for some time. Cole, thank God. I went up to your place, been trying to catch you since yesterday. What happened? Cole said. Greer's men. Pete was getting the words out in the order his lungs allowed. They came through the valley 2 days ago, stopped at our place at the Hendersons at the Wrights, asking about your deed, asking if any of us had seen a federal surveyor up here recently. He caught his breath. But that ain't the worst of it. Abigail had gone very still on her horse. What's the worst of it? Pete looked at her, then at Cole. They tried to move cattle onto the high pasture yesterday morning, about 40 head Greer's brand. My father saw them coming up the south trail and rode out to block them. He paused. They told him the pasture was under new management, that the deed had been voided by the county. That's a lie, Abigail said sharply. The deed hasn't been touched. The county has no authority to void it. I know that, and you know that, Pete said. But they had a paper, looked official. My father couldn't read the fine print from horseback, and they wouldn't let him get closer. He looked at Cole. He turned them back this time. But Cole, they'll come back. And they'll bring more men next time. Cole's face had gone to stone. The controlled, dangerous stillness she'd seen in the storeroom at May's kitchen on the day she'd told him the wound wasn't from a fence post. The injunction, Abigail said. Her mind was moving fast. Nathaniel filed it before we left Helena, but we don't have the signed order in hand yet. It could be another week before the federal marshal receives it and it becomes enforceable. A week, Cole said. A week in which Greer apparently plans to manufacture a county voiding of the deed and move cattle onto the pasture as a fait accompli. She looked at him. If his cattle are on that land when the federal case opens, his lawyers will argue established occupancy. Can they do that? Pete asked. They can try, she said, and it would complicate things significantly. She looked at Cole. We have to go back up, right now. Bozeman. Dobbins will keep for 2 more days, she said. The pasture won't. Cole had already turned his horse. They reached the high pasture by mid-afternoon. No cattle, not yet. But the evidence of where they'd tried to push through was clear enough. Torn grass-churned ground along the south trail. The specific disturbance of land that has been argued over by large animals, driven by purposeful men. Cole rode the fence line in silence. Abigail stayed with the horses and thought. By the time he came back, she had made a decision. We need neighbors, she said. Right now, today. Pete's father, the Hendersons, the Wrights, anyone whose land borders yours or who's witnessed your continuous use of this pasture. We bring them up here. We get their signed statements about what they saw yesterday, and we send those statements to Nathaniel by express rider tonight. That shores up the federal case, Cole said. It does more than that. It establishes community witness to Greer's attempted trespass, which supports the injunction petition. She paused. And it means that when Greer's men come back, and they will come back, they won't find one man alone on a disputed pasture. They'll find a community that's documented their conduct and sent it to a federal lawyer in Helena. Cole looked at her. You think community witness changes his calculation? I think men like Greer operate on the assumption that isolated people stay isolated, she said. We take that assumption away from him. He was already moving. I'll ride to the Sorrells' place first. Pete's father knows everyone in this valley. I'll start drafting the witness statement form, she said. Something simple enough that men who aren't comfortable with legal language can sign without feeling they're signing away something they don't understand. Cole paused with his horse half-turned. You think of everything, he said. It came out different than she expected. Rough-edged and genuine, no performance in it. The statement of a man who'd been alone long enough that the presence of a capable person at his side still surprised him every time he looked up and found her there. Not everything, she said. Go. He went. By evening, 5 men sat around the table in Cole's cabin. Tom Sorrells. Pete's father, broad, weathered with the careful dignity of a man who'd built something from nothing and intended to keep it. The Henderson brothers, Edward and James, who ran sheep, 2 ridges over, and had no particular love for cattle operators, but strong feelings about men who used official-looking paper to tell lies. Arthur Wright, 60 years old, who'd been in this valley before any of them, and who remembered when the federal surveyor had come through in 1875, and measured every inch of Cole's high pasture with a precision that Arthur had watched personally for 3 days straight. That last point made Abigail look up from her writing. You were present during the federal survey. Watched the whole thing, Arthur said. He had the unhurried quality of a very old, very certain man. Cole's father hired me to make sure it was done right. I was with the surveyor every day for 3 days. I can describe every landmark, every measurement, every boundary marker he put down. He paused. I've never been asked to say so officially. She felt the significance of that land, like a physical weight. Mr. Wright, she said carefully, would you be willing to make a sworn statement to that effect? And if necessary, travel to Helena to testify before a federal commissioner. Arthur looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him, the look of 2 men who'd known each other a long time. Cole's mother was a decent woman, Arthur said simply. This is her son's land. Yes, Abigail wrote it all down. Every man's account of yesterday's attempted trespass. Arthur's account of the 1875 survey, the Hendersons' account of previous incidents in which Greer's men had come through the valley making claims and intimidating people who hadn't pushed back. It took 2 hours and filled 6 pages, and by the end of it, she had more than she'd hoped for. She sent Pete riding to Helena with the express packet at 9 o'clock that night and stood in the doorway watching him go and felt the case clicking into place like the tumblers of a lock. Cole appeared beside her. Nathaniel's going to want to talk to Arthur Wright directly, she said. I know. I'll get Arthur to Helena when the time comes. And Dobbins. And Dobbins. He was quiet for a moment. Bozeman day after tomorrow. Yes. The night was warm, that deep summer warmth that settled into the mountains like something earned. She was tired in a way that went all the way down, the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from having spent a day doing exactly what was needed without wasting emotion. You should sleep, Cole said. So should you. I'm going to check the south fence line first. Cole? An hour, he said. Then I'll sleep. He looked at her. Go inside, Abigail. I'll be right behind. She went inside. She was asleep before she heard him come back in, but she heard the door, and she heard the particular sound of a man moving through a familiar space in the dark without needing a light, and she felt the specific quality of not being alone that she hadn't felt in a very long time. The ride to Bozeman took 2.5 days. They were efficient about it, moving fast, stopping only when necessary, talking when it was useful, and not talking when it wasn't. They'd reached a point in their traveling where silence between them wasn't empty. It had texture. It carried things. On the second evening, camped beside a creek with the fire burning low between them, Cole said, "I've been thinking about what Nathaniel said, about the high pine." She looked at him across the fire. "What specifically?" "That the debts were significant. That the sale might have been inevitable." He stared at the fire. "I've told myself for 4 years that he was wrong. That there was another way. That I would have found it if he'd given me the chance." A pause. "I don't know if that's true." She was quiet. "I think," he said slowly, "I needed someone to be wrong so I could be angry. And Nathaniel was wrong about how he did it, whatever the finances said. He didn't tell me about the debts, he just moved." His voice was even, but she heard everything underneath it. "But wanting him to be completely wrong, so I could be completely right, that's been eating up a lot of room inside me for 4 years. "It has," she said, not unkindly. He looked at her. "You're not going to tell me I'm wrong." "You're not wrong. He handled it badly, and you've let it cost you more than the ranch." He absorbed that. "You mean Nathaniel himself?" "I mean everything. Time. Energy. The years you spent being angry instead of—" She stopped. "Instead of what?" She looked at the fire for a moment. "Instead of letting someone in," she said quietly. "You built your life on that mountain in a way that made sure no one could take anything from you again. I understand why. But Cole, the things worth having are the things that can be taken." The fire crackled. A nightbird called once from somewhere in the dark and went quiet. "Is that your mother talking?" he asked. "It's me talking," she said, though she'd probably have said it better. I was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he was done, and she'd begun to settle back into the particular kind of traveling silence they'd developed when he said, "I'm going to talk to Nathaniel, properly, when this is over." She looked at him. "Not forgive him everything," he said quickly. "But talk. Actually talk. Because what you said about the grave—" He stopped. "She'd be angry with both of us. She was practical like that." "She sounds like she was wonderful," Abigail said. "She would have liked you," Cole said. It came out straightforwardly, without decoration. She liked people who didn't back down when they were right. And people who admitted when they were wrong. Especially those. He looked at her across the fire, and the gray eyes held something she hadn't seen there before, or hadn't let herself see. "She would have said I should have found you sooner." The fire between them burned quietly. "You found me when you needed me," she said. "And I needed you when you found me. That's enough." He nodded once, slowly. The way he nodded when something settled in him, like something that had been waiting a long time to settle. Earl Dobbins was 71 years old and lived in a house that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper and the particular mustiness of a life spent around official documents. He answered the door himself and looked at Cole with the careful recognition of a man who'd been a county clerk long enough to have a memory for faces. "Bennett," he said. Not surprised. Something else, something closer to resigned. "Mr. Dobbins," Cole said. "This is Miss Abigail Carter. She handles my legal correspondence. We need to talk to you about a filing that was made at the Silver Creek County Clerk's office approximately 2 years ago." Dobbins looked at Abigail, then back at Cole. He stepped aside and let them in. I knew exactly what they'd come about. She understood that from the first minute, the way he settled into his chair across from them, with the careful arrangement of a man who had been expecting something like this for some time, had been deciding what he would say when it came, and had perhaps not yet settled on the answer. She let Cole open it. He laid out the situation plainly. Greer, the deed, the fraudulent county challenge, the federal filing now underway. Dobbins listened with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the middle distance. When Cole finished, the old man was quiet. "I was the county clerk for 22 years, Dobbins said finally. "I recorded every deed, every dispute, every transfer of land in that county. I knew what was valid and what wasn't before a lawyer opened his mouth." "Then you knew the challenge to my deed was fraudulent," Cole said. Dobbins looked at him. "I knew it was irregular," he said carefully. "The deed was properly executed. The federal survey was on record. There was no legitimate legal basis for the challenge." A pause. I also knew who Silas Greer was and what he was capable of doing to people who got in his way. Abigail spoke for the first time. "Were you threatened, Mr. Dobbins?" The old man looked at her. Something shifted in his face, something that had been held tightly for a long time. "Greer's lawyer came to my office the morning he filed," Dobbins said. "He gave me the paperwork. He also told me that Greer was a man who took note of which public officials were cooperative and which ones created unnecessary complications." He paused. "My daughter was living in Silver Creek at the time. Her husband had a dry goods business. Greer had the ability to make that business very difficult." Abigail felt something cold and clear move through her. "So you accepted the filing?" "I accepted it. I recorded it as received. I did not. I want to be precise about this. I did not certify it as valid. I recorded it as a disputed filing, which technically preserves the record without affirming the claim." He looked down at his hands. "I told myself that was enough, that I'd done what I could." "You knew the dispute would go nowhere in the county system," Cole said. His voice was controlled, but just barely. "I believed Cole Bennett was a stubborn enough man to keep fighting it," Dobbins said. "I told myself you'd find a way." He looked up. "I'm sorry. For what it's worth after all this time. I was a coward when you needed someone to be brave." The room was quiet. Abigail put her pen down on her ledger. "Mr. Dobbins," she said, "your daughter no longer lives in Silver Creek." "No, she moved to Bozeman 18 months ago. That's why I'm here." "Silas Greer has no leverage over you anymore." He looked at her. His jaw was working slightly. "No," he said. "He doesn't. We are building a federal fraud case against Silas Greer," she said. "We have a valid deed, a federal survey, 6 signed community witness statements, documented evidence of financial interference, and a lawyer in Helena who knows every corner of territorial land law." She paused. "What we need is someone who was in that room when Greer's lawyer filed a fraudulent challenge against a deed he knew to be valid. Someone who can testify that the challenge was irregular, that it was filed under duress, and that the county clerk's office accepted it, not because it had legal merit, but because a powerful man used intimidation to make it happen." Dobbins was very still. "If you testify," she said, "Greer doesn't just lose this case. He faces federal fraud charges. He loses his business connections. He loses the leverage he's used to destroy people for years." She met his eyes. "You said you were a coward when you should have been brave. This is the moment when being brave actually matters." The old man looked at Cole. "Your deed, it's ironclad. Federal survey dated 1875, witnessed by a man who watched every day of the measurement," Cole said. "The deed is properly executed and recorded. The challenge has no legal standing in any jurisdiction." Dobbins was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll need to speak to your lawyer directly, in writing before I commit to anything." "Of course," Abigail said. She was already writing Nathaniel's address on a fresh page. "And I want it on record," Dobbins said, "that I recorded that filing as disputed, not certified. That distinction matters." "It does," she agreed, "and it will be on record." Dobbins took the paper with Nathaniel's address. He looked at it. He looked at Cole. "Your mother was a good woman," he said. "Better than most of us deserved in that county." Cole's throat moved. "Yes," he said. "She was." They rode hard, getting back to Silver Creek. Nathaniel's wire reached them at the boarding house in Bozeman the morning they were leaving. He'd received the witness statements. The injunction had been signed by the federal judge, and a deputy federal marshal had been dispatched to Silver Creek to serve Greer with the order. She read the wire twice. Cole read it over her shoulder. "The injunction is signed," she said. "Greer can't move on the land. Not without being in contempt of a federal court order." She looked up at him. "It's not over. The full case will take months. But this means he can't win by moving fast," Cole said. "He has to fight it in court." "Where Nathaniel is waiting," she said. Something moved across Cole's face. It wasn't the not-quite smile. It was larger than that, fuller. The expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just felt someone else put a hand under the weight. "Let's go home," he said. She heard the word, home. He'd said it without weighing it, without the careful management he brought to most things he said. And she thought that was probably the most honest thing she'd heard him say since the night he'd told her his mother was buried behind the tree line. She folded the wire and put it in her coat pocket next to the correspondence ledger. "Yes," she said. "Let's." They came back into Silver Creek on a Thursday afternoon, and May was standing in the doorway of her kitchen like she'd been watching for them, which she probably had. She looked at their faces and made a sound of satisfaction. Good, she said. "Come eat something. Both of you look like saddle leather." They sat at May's counter and ate hot food for the first time in days, and May refilled their coffee without being asked, and didn't pepper them with questions, which Abigail had come to understand was May's particular form of respect. She trusted people to tell her what mattered when they were ready. Cole told her the short version. The federal filing the injunction, Nathaniel Dobbins. May listened with her arms folded and her expression moving through several things. "Dobbins," she said when Cole finished. "I always thought he knew more than he said." "He did," Abigail said. "He'll testify." May looked at her. The same look she'd given her on the first day, the look of a woman who assessed situations and people with equal briskness. "You put that together." "We put it together," Abigail said. May made a sound that was almost a laugh. She looked at Cole. "You're not going to be a fool about this woman, are you?" Cole set down his coffee cup. "May, I'm just asking." "You're not just asking, you're meddling, and you know the difference. A woman who rode to Helena and then Bozeman and back in 2 weeks to fight your land case," May said, utterly unbothered by this, "deserves not to be taken for granted. I'm noting that for your benefit." "Your benefit is noted," Cole said. Abigail stared at her coffee. "Good," May said, and went back to her kitchen like the conversation had concluded to her satisfaction. 3 days later, the federal marshal rode into Silver Creek and served Silas Greer the injunction. Abigail heard about it secondhand from Pete Sorrells, who'd been in town that morning and had watched from the street with the specific satisfaction of a young man who'd spent 2 years watching a wrong thing happen and had finally seen the first sign of it going right. "Greer's face," Pete said with considerable feeling, "was something I will remember for a long time." Cole was sitting across the table from Abigail when Pete said this. He didn't say anything, but she saw it, the exhale slow and deliberate, the release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. The specific relaxation of a man who has been waiting for a thing to crack and has finally heard the sound. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the first time she'd done that. Deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what it meant. His hand turned under hers and held it. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed saying that the held hands didn't say more precisely. Outside Silver Creek went about its afternoon, and on the mountain, the high pasture sat under a federal injunction, and in Helena, a man named Nathaniel Bennett was building a case that would take Silas Greer apart, piece by documented piece, and somewhere in Bozeman, an old man was drafting a letter about a morning he'd spent 22 years trying not to think about. The thing was happening. Not fast, not without cost. But it was happening. She felt Cole's hand solid and warm around hers, and she thought about a woman who'd stepped off a train with 73 cents and a broken promise, and found herself somehow here at this table, in this fight with this man. She wasn't sure what to call what she felt. She was careful with words and more careful with her own heart. But it was real. And it was hers. And for a woman who'd arrived in the West with nothing that was worth more than she had words to measure. The federal case took 4 months. Abigail knew it would. She'd told Cole from the beginning that this wasn't going to be fast, and he'd said he understood, and he had intellectually. But understanding a thing and living through it were different countries, and the months between the injunction and the hearing were some of the hardest she'd seen him endure. Not because the legal ground shifted. It didn't. Nathaniel was meticulous and relentless in the way that only a man who understood every angle of a system could be, and the case he built was, as Abigail had predicted standing in his office that first afternoon, airtight. The hard part was the waiting, and Greer. Greer did not accept the injunction quietly. Men like Greer never did. He filed 3 motions to dismiss in the first 6 weeks, all of which Nathaniel demolished with the particular pleasure of a man who enjoys being right in writing. He sent his lawyers to interview Arthur Wright, who sat across from them for 2 hours and answered every question with the patient precision of a 70-year-old man who had watched a federal surveyor work for 3 days in 1875 and remembered every detail. He attempted to have Dobbins's prospective testimony excluded on the grounds that it represented a breach of public office confidentiality, a motion so legally thin that even the judge looked unimpressed. And twice during those 4 months, men came up the mountain at night. The first time Cole heard them and was outside before they reached the cabin. Abigail heard him leave and was at the window in the dark, watching her hand on the latch, ready to do whatever needed doing. There were 2 men. Words she couldn't hear clearly. Cole's voice low and final, the voice of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. The men left. Cole came back inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment, saying nothing. "Should I write it down?" she asked. "Already adding it to the list Nathaniel asked for," he said. She got up and made coffee. It was 2 in the morning. They sat at the table and drank it, and neither of them suggested going back to sleep because neither of them was going to. "He's scared," Cole said. "Yes. Scared men do stupid things." "They do," she agreed. "Which is why we document everything and let Nathaniel turn it into evidence." Cole looked at her across the table. "You're not frightened." "I didn't say that. You act like you're not." "I act like being frightened isn't a reason to stop," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment in the lamplight. 4 months of mountain living sat between them now. 4 months of early mornings and burned biscuits and late nights over paperwork, and 2 days in Helena and the road to Bozeman, and a fire by a creek, and a hand held across a table in May's kitchen. She knew the shape of him now, in the way you know a place you've lived, not just the surfaces, but the load-bearing parts, the places where the structure was strongest and the places where it had been repaired. "I'm going to say something," he said. "All right." "Not the thing I said I'd wait to say," he said, carefully. "Not yet, but something adjacent to it." She waited. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come up that mountain with me," he said. "And I don't mean the paperwork. I mean—" He stopped. Started again. "I've been alone up here long enough that I'd started to think that was just what my life was. That the mountain was enough. The cattle, the land, the quiet." He looked at his coffee cup. "It's not enough. I know that now. I think I knew it before, but I didn't have the evidence." She looked at him. "You're using legal language to talk about your feelings." "It's the language I'm comfortable with right now." "Cole." "I know." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Simply, directly. The way she said the things that mattered. "When this is over and done, and Greer is a footnote in a federal court record, I'm still going to be here, if that's what you want." He looked up from his coffee cup. "It's what I want," he said. The roughness in his voice was different from the roughness of exhaustion or control. It was the roughness of a man saying a true thing he'd been holding for too long. "Good," she said. "Then stop treating it like something that might disappear if you look at it directly." He almost smiled. The real one. The one she'd been cataloging all these months. The one that changed the lines around his eyes and made him look like the man he'd been before, whatever had made him so careful about being seen. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She went back to her coffee. Outside the mountain was dark, and the cattle were quiet. And somewhere in Helena, a case file was sitting on a federal judge's desk, and it was going to be all right. She believed that. She'd built it herself piece by piece, and she knew the strength of what they'd made. The second night visit was worse. It came 6 weeks before the hearing date, and this time there were 4 men, and this time they didn't stop at words. Cole heard them on the south fence. She heard the fence go a sound she'd learned to recognize the particular snap of wire under deliberate pressure. She was out of bed and dressed before he was back inside. "Stay here," he said. "Absolutely not," she said. "Abigail." "There are 4 of them," she said. "I counted the horses. You are not going out there alone." He looked at her. He knew she was right. He hated that she was right, and she knew that too, and she didn't take any satisfaction in it. "Stay behind me," he said. "Within reason," she said, and followed him out. What happened in the next 20 minutes was something she wrote down afterward in precise detail in the correspondence ledger, the way her mother had taught her. Write it while it's exact before memory starts smoothing the edges. 4 men. Greer's brand on the horses. Wire cutters. 40 feet of fence pulled down and rolled up, which was the particular act of someone planning to claim it had never been there. Cole's voice, steady and cold, telling them they were trespassing on land under federal injunction. The specific sound of a man deciding whether to push further and deciding against it. The horses leaving, and afterward, sitting in the cabin with the lamp burning high. Cole's hands on the table, the cut on his forearm from a piece of snapped fence wire. Not deep, not dangerous, but there that she cleaned and bandaged with the same steady hands she'd used in May's kitchen on the night all of this had started. "Full circle," she said quietly, tying off the bandage. He looked at his arm, then at her. "You stitched me together twice now." "Hopefully that's enough," she said. He caught her hand before she could pull it back. Held it the way he'd held it in May's kitchen, certain deliberate the grip of a man who knew what he was holding and intended to keep it. "After the hearing," he said. "Cole, I'm asking you to wait one more time," he said. "Not because I'm unsure, because I want to say it right. When this is done, and there's nothing hanging over us, when I can say it clean." She looked at their joined hands. She looked at his face. "All right," she said. "One more time." She sent the wire-cutting incident to Nathaniel the next morning. Nathaniel added it to the evidence package with the brief clipped notation that it represented the 5th documented act of intimidation against a party to an active federal case and constituted additional grounds for criminal contempt charges against Greer personally. She read that notation 3 times and felt something very close to satisfaction. The hearing was held in Helena in the 3rd week of October. Abigail and Cole rode down together as they'd done everything side by side. Early start provisions packed, not wasting words on things that didn't need saying. Nathaniel met them at his office the evening before, and she noticed with a private, careful pleasure that the brothers greeted each other with something warmer than they'd managed in the summer. Not yet easy. But the 4 years of silence had cracked open enough to let some air through. Nathaniel had aged slightly in 4 months, the way people age when they've been working very hard on something that matters. He'd also, she suspected, enjoyed himself more than he'd expected to. "We're going to win," he said without preamble when they were all sitting down. "Tell me where the risk is," Cole said. "There isn't much. Dobbins is solid. Arthur Wright is frankly exceptional. A 70-year-old man who can describe the precise location of every boundary marker set by a federal surveyor in 1875 is the best possible witness to the validity of a federal survey." Nathaniel paused. "Greer's lawyers will try to argue procedural grounds. They'll argue that the original county filing represented a legitimate legal question and not fraud. They'll argue Dobbins' testimony is compromised by the passage of time," and Abigail prompted. "And I have Greer's lawyer's billing records from 2 years ago subpoenaed from his former law partner who, as it turns out, had a falling out with him 6 months back and is cooperating enthusiastically." Nathaniel laid a file on the desk. He billed Greer for a meeting held the day before the fraudulent county filing. The meeting notes described the strategy for challenging Cole's deed as, and I'm quoting, "creating sufficient legal ambiguity to enable long-term pressure." He looked at Cole steadily. "They knew it was fraudulent. They designed it to be. That's not a legal dispute. That's deliberate fraud, and it's documented in the opposing lawyer's own billing records." Cole was very still. "How did you get that?" "I told you. The former partner is cooperating." "Why?" Nathaniel's expression was dry. "Greer owed him money. Significant money. The partnership dissolved badly." He paused. Greer's habit of treating people as tools eventually extended to his own lawyer. "I suggest we note that as a pattern." Abigail looked at the file. She thought about Silas Greer sitting in Cole's chair in the cabin, his practiced pleasantness, his careful threat. She thought about the man from Billings who'd lost his ranch and come to Nathaniel too late. She thought about Earl Dobbins's daughter in Silver Creek and the dry goods business, and 22 years of good public service bent by one morning of fear. "This ends it," she said. "The land case, yes. The criminal fraud charges, those will move separately and take longer. But the land is Cole's. After tomorrow, no one can argue otherwise." Cole was looking at the file. He picked up the billing record and read the quoted line again. "Creating sufficient legal ambiguity to enable long-term pressure." His face went through something complex and then went still. 2 years, he said. 2 years of that. Yes, Nathaniel said. He said it without deflection, facing it directly the way a man faces something he's partly responsible for. Because if he'd been in Cole's life 2 years ago, instead of behind 4 years of silence, the case might have been resolved in weeks. Cole put the document down. He looked at his brother. "Thank you," he said. "Not easy. Not the kind of thank you that cost nothing. The kind that costs something real, that requires a man to set down his pride and his grievance and say the true thing anyway." Nathaniel nodded once. "I didn't say you're welcome because that would have made it too small." He just nodded, and they both understood. Abigail picked up her correspondence ledger. "Then let's make sure tomorrow goes exactly as planned." The hearing lasted 6 hours. She sat behind the bar in the federal courtroom and watched Nathaniel work and understood for the first time completely what Cole had meant when he'd said his brother was the smartest person he knew in the courtroom way. Nathaniel was precise the way a surgeon was precise, not a movement wasted, not a word without purpose. He laid the case in the order she would have chosen herself, building from foundation to structure to roof. The valid deed, the 6 years of continuous documented use. Arthur Wright's testimony that dismantled any claim of surveying error. Dobbins's testimony that dismantled any claim of legitimate dispute. And finally, the billing record, which dismantled Greer's entire position at the foundation. Greer's lawyers were good. She acknowledged that professionally. But they were trying to build a defense out of procedural arguments against a case that had no procedural weakness, and it showed. When the federal commissioner spoke his decision at the end of the afternoon, she'd already known what it would be for 2 hours. The high pasture belonged to Cole Bennett by valid federal deed, continuous documented use, and federal survey. The county challenge was ruled fraudulent. The file was referred to the federal prosecutor for criminal fraud consideration. Silas Greer was ordered to pay costs. Cole sat very still when the commissioner finished speaking. She put her hand on his arm. Just briefly. He put his hand over hers. Just briefly. It was enough. They walked out of the federal building into the October air. Cole and Abigail and Nathaniel, and stood on the steps for a moment, in the way people stand when something large has just concluded and they haven't yet figured out what to do with their hands. Nathaniel spoke first. "The criminal referral will take time, but Greer's business connections won't survive the publicity of a federal fraud finding. He'll be managing his own collapse for the foreseeable future." A pause. "He won't trouble you again." Cole looked at his brother. "I want to talk to you," he said. "Not about the case, about the high pine, about the things that happened." Nathaniel was very still. "Not today," Cole said. "Not right now, but soon. I think it's time." Something moved in Nathaniel's face. Careful and controlled the way everything was with him, but real underneath. "I'd like that," he said. As simply as he said anything. Cole nodded. Abigail looked at the two of them, the brothers who'd loved the same mountain woman and broken something between themselves that had taken 4 years and a federal case to start repairing. And she thought about the things people carry and the things they put down and the difference between the two. "Come to dinner," she said to Nathaniel. "Tonight, before we ride back tomorrow." Nathaniel looked at her with the measuring expression she'd come to recognize as his version of warmth. "You're inviting me to dinner." "Someone has to," she said. "Cole won't." "I was going to," Cole said. "You were thinking about it," she said. "I'm doing it. Nathaniel, dinner at 7, the boarding house on Elm Street." Nathaniel looked at his brother. "She's efficient," he said. "I've noticed," Cole said. "Dag." Dinner was not easy and not hard. It was somewhere in the middle, which was the right place for it to be. The brothers talked around the edges of the things they needed to say, and occasionally into the center of them, and Abigail ate her meal and contributed when it was useful and stayed quiet when it wasn't, because this wasn't her conversation to carry. She was there as a kind of anchor, the person who made the room feel safe enough for the real things to come to the surface. Near the end of the evening, Nathaniel said, "She told me you were going to talk to me. Before the hearing. She said you'd decided." Cole looked at her. "I mentioned it in passing," she said, unbothered. "In passing," Cole repeated. "You needed someone to hold you accountable to the decision," she said. "I held you accountable." Cole shook his head slowly. There was something in his expression she'd been watching all evening, a looseness, a lightness. The expression of a man from whom something very heavy has been lifted and who is still adjusting to the change in weight. Nathaniel watched the two of them with the quiet attention of a man who spent his professional life reading rooms. He didn't say anything, but she saw something in his eyes that might in a different man have been called fond. They rode back to Silver Creek the next morning. The mountain was waiting. That was how it felt, like the mountain had been holding its breath while they were gone, and was now releasing it as they came up the trail. The aspens turned gold in the October air. The cattle moving on the high pasture, undisturbed the cabin sitting where it had always sat with the pine trees behind it, and the small grave plot further back where Cole visited on the first of every month. She was off her horse and inside before he'd finished with the animals, partly from habit, and partly because she needed a moment alone. The cabin had changed in the month she'd been there. She'd changed it in the small ways that a person changes a space when they begin to think of it as theirs. A second chair moved closer to the window, her books on the shelf next to his. The correspondence ledger on the table closed now, its work done. A dried flower in a tin cup on the windowsill that she'd picked on the road back from Bozeman, because it was a fine color and she'd wanted it. She stood in the middle of the cabin and looked at all of it. Cole came in. He stopped when he saw her standing there. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. "More than all right." He came to the table, set his hat down, looked at the cabin the way she'd just been looking at it, taking an inventory. She thought of what it was now versus what it had been a few months ago, before a woman with a leather valise and 73 cents had walked into May's kitchen and stitched him back together and followed him up a mountain and refused to let a wrong thing win. "Abigail," he said. "Cole." She said it at the same moment, and they both stopped, and she felt something that she'd been careful with for 4 months, and careful with for a reason. She'd needed to be sure it was real. Needed to know it was built on something that would hold, not on gratitude or proximity or need. She felt it come clear and certain in her chest, like a bell that had finally been struck. "You first," he said. "No," she said. "You said you wanted to say it right. Say it right." He looked at her across the table. The gray eyes were steady and unguarded, in a way she'd only seen a few times at the fire by the creek, in the doorway of her room in Helena, at the table in May's kitchen, with their hands joined. The moments when he stopped managing himself and let her see what was actually there. "I told you I spent years searching for a place to belong," he said. His voice was quiet and direct. "This mountain, this land. I thought if I could just keep it, if I could hold on to the one thing my mother loved, that would be enough. That would be the belonging I was looking for." She waited. "It's not the land," he said. "I know that now. The land it's real, and I love it, and I'm going to fight for it as long as I'm standing. But the belonging I was looking for..." He stopped, looked at her with everything unguarded. "It looks like you. It sounds like you arguing with my brother about the wording of a legal letter. It feels like you putting your hand on mine in May's kitchen." He paused. "I've been alone a long time. I made myself good at it. I told myself I preferred it. And then you stepped into that storeroom and looked at a wound I was lying about and told me exactly what it was, and something in me..." He stopped again. "Cole," she said softly. "I love you," he said, plainly, directly. The way he said the true things, without decoration, without any of the preamble that men sometimes put around the important words to soften the risk of saying them. "I want you to stay, not as my correspondent, not as my employee, as..." He looked at her. "I don't want to presume what that means to you, I know what it means to me." She came around the table. She stood in front of him and looked up at him. This man who'd come down from his mountain broken and let her put him back together, who'd eaten burnt biscuits without complaint and defended the right of a woman to make her own decisions and held her hand across tables and stood in doorways with his hat off when he had something real to say, and she felt nothing complicated about it at all. "It means the same thing to me," she said. "It has for a long time. I was waiting until the case was done, so I knew it was clear that it wasn't circumstance, that it wasn't the mountain and the fight and the need. I wanted to be sure." "Are you sure?" "Cole," she said, and she put her hand against his jaw, the way a woman touches the face of a man she has chosen deliberately and completely. "I came to Silver Creek with nothing. I stood on that platform with 73 cents and a broken promise. And I thought that was what my life was going to be. A string of things that didn't work out." She felt his hand come up to cover hers against his face. "And then you walked into May's kitchen, unconscious and bleeding, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." He laughed. The full one. The one she'd only heard a few times. It changed his face completely, took 10 years off, and put something back that had been gone a long time. He laughed, and she laughed with him, and he pulled her close and she went, and it was nothing like the careful managed distance they'd maintained for 4 months. It was the end of that. The beginning of something else. He held her with the same certainty with which he did everything completely, without reservation, the way a man holds something he has decided to keep. She wrote to May that evening. The letter was short. It said, "The case is won. The mountain is his. I'm staying. Come visit when the weather holds." May wrote back in 10 days. "The letter said I knew from the day you walked into my kitchen. I just didn't know it would take you quite this long to catch up. The room is always here if you need it. You won't need it. May." Abigail read the letter twice and put it on the shelf next to the dried flour in the tin cup. 3 weeks later, Nathaniel rode up the mountain. He didn't announce he was coming. He simply appeared on a Sunday morning, tying his horse at the post outside, with the precision of a man who didn't leave anything crooked, and knocked on the door as if 4 years of silence were something a person could simply step over. Cole opened the door, and they stood there for a moment. 2 brothers, 2 sides of the same loss, 2 halves of a story that had taken too long to find its ending. "I brought the survey records from the Helena file," Nathaniel said. "You should have the originals." Cole stepped back from the door. "Let him in." Abigail set a 3rd cup on the table without being asked and poured coffee for all 3 of them, and sat down, and the Bennett brothers sat across from each other, and the real conversation, the one about their father and their mother, and the high pine, and the years between began. She didn't absent herself. They didn't ask her to. She understood part of the architecture of this now. Not the center of it, but a necessary part. The person who had made the room safe enough for the hard things. She sat and drank her coffee, and listened, and spoke when it was useful, and the morning went on around them, and outside the mountain held the October light like something earned, and the cattle moved on the high pasture where no one would ever push them off again. Done. On the 1st of November, Cole went to his mother's grave. He went as he always did, alone. Abigail watched him go from the window and did not follow, because that was his. She would never intrude on that. He was gone an hour. When he came back, he stood in the doorway for a moment, without speaking the way he stood when something had settled in him. "I told her about you," he said. She looked up from her work. "I told her what happened. The whole of it, Gerald Holt May's kitchen, the case Nathaniel." He paused. "I told her I wasn't going to be alone up here anymore." She felt something full and certain move through her chest. "What did she say?" she asked. Because it was the right question. Something quiet and real moved across his face. She said it was about time. Abigail smiled. The full kind, the kind she didn't always let people see. "She sounds exactly like I imagined her." "She would have been insufferable about how right she was," Cole said. The roughness in his voice was warm. "She usually was." He came to the table, sat down across from her, picked up his coffee, looked at her the way he looked at things he intended to keep looking at for a long time. "Ask me," she said. He had been carrying it for months. She'd known that. He'd said he'd ask when it was clean, when there was nothing hanging over them, and now there was nothing. The land was safe, the case was won. His brother was back in his life in the broken open and starting to mend way that counted for more than the way it had been before. The mountain was theirs in every way that mattered. He set his coffee down. "Abigail Carter," he said, "will you stay on this mountain with me? Not because you have nowhere else to go, you could go anywhere, and I think we both know that now, but because you want this, because you want me." She looked at him across the table. This man, this particular careful, stubborn, loyal, undemonstrative man who had loved his mother and kept his promises and fought for 6 years for a piece of land because it was right, and who had let her in piece by careful piece until she was woven into the fabric of his life in a way that couldn't be separated out without unraveling both of them. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly why." He reached across this table and took her hand. Not for reassurance. Not because he was afraid of the answer. Because it was the right thing to do when you were holding the thing you'd been searching for. Outside the mountain went on, being the mountain indifferent and magnificent and permanent in the way that land is permanent, outlasting the people who love it and sheltering the ones who stay. The cattle moved. The pines held the wind. Behind the tree line in the small, quiet plot where a good woman had been buried with her boots on and her books nearby. The first frost of the season had come and gone and left the grass clean. Two people who had both been left with nothing had found in each other everything they hadn't known to look for. Not because the West had been kind to them. It hadn't. The West had taken things from both of them. Time trust the particular innocence of people who believed that promises meant what they said. It had taken, and it had tested, and it had shown them without mercy exactly what they were made of. And what they were made of was the ability to stay, to hold on, to look at a wrong thing and refuse to let it win. To look at a right thing, a person, a place, a life worth building, and say yes even when saying yes cost something. They had paid the cost. They had earned the answer. The mountain kept its own time. The season turned. And on the high pasture above Silver Creek, Montana, in the long summer that was already becoming a winter that would become another summer. Two people sat at a table with their hands joined and their work in front of them and the rest of their lives opening out ahead like land that had never been fenced. They were home. They had always been heading here. They just hadn't